30th, 2026. Broad Peak, Pakistan. Somewhere above 8,000 meters, an international expedition led by Nims Dai was moving toward one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Then an avalanche struck. 10 climbers would not return from the mountain. But this story is not simply about how they died. It is about who they were before Broad Peak. The records they broke, the mountains they had conquered, the dreams they were still chasing, and one question that has followed high-altitude climbing for generations. When experience, preparation, technology, and ambition all meet the same mountain, what finally determines who comes home? Among those caught in this tragedy were some of the strongest climbers of their generation. For Nims Dai, Broad Peak was never supposed to be the end of the story. By July 2026, he had already built a career around doing what many climbers considered almost impossible. In 2019, Dai completed all 14 of the world's 8,000-meter peaks in just 189 days, 6 months, and 6 days. The previous benchmark had taken years. His achievement, known as Project Possible, transformed him from a former Gurkha and Special Boat Service soldier into one of the most recognizable figures in modern mountaineering. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Dai was born in Nepal's remote Mayagdi district and later grew up in Chitwan. His connection to the mountains was deeply personal. Before Project Possible, he had dreamed of building a home in Kathmandu where his mother could live comfortably. He and his wife Suchi eventually made that dream real. There was, however, a painful chapter behind it. As Dai prepared for Project Possible, he took enormous financial risks. He mortgaged his home in Britain and borrowed money to finance an expedition that had no guarantee of success. His mother, Purna Kumari, reportedly asked him a question that stayed with him. "Nirmal, your parents are old now. Did you go to the mountains to die because caring for us became difficult?" It was not a question about climbing technique. It was a question about responsibility. And then, in 2020, Dai experienced a loss that changed the meaning of that dream. On February 25th, he and Suchi arrived in Kathmandu, hoping to bring his mother into the home they had prepared. They learned that she had died only about 2 hours before their arrival. Dai continued climbing. In January 2021, he joined an all-Nepali team that made history on K2, completing the first winter ascent of the world's second highest mountain. Dai reached the summit without supplemental oxygen, another landmark in an already extraordinary career. Then came Broad Peak. Before the expedition, Dai had already climbed Gasherbrum 2. In a video later shared by Nirvana Chaudhary, Dai explained that Broad Peak could give him another unprecedented achievement, becoming the first person to climb all 14 8,000ers twice without supplemental oxygen.
Literally submitted, G2, and now I'm heading towards Broad Peak. And the reason why I'm doing Broad Peak is if I do that, I will not only finish my hat-trick project, that is to climb 14 peaks 3 times, 7 summits 3 times, but also I'll be the only person in the world to climb 14 peaks 2 times, twice, without oxygen.
It was a remarkable ambition, but it also revealed something important about elite mountaineering. Records do not make mountains predictable. On July 30th, 2026, an avalanche struck the international expedition on Broad Peak. Dai and members of his team were among those killed. He was 43. And beside him was another Nepali climber whose story was remarkable in a very different way. Pur Bahadur Gurung, widely known as Yukta, had spent years building his career from the bottom of the expedition system. Born in 1988 in northern Gorkha, Gurung once dreamed of joining the British Army. The Nepalese Civil War disrupted that path, and the mountains became his profession instead. He entered the industry in 2009, working as a porter and kitchen helper. Over time, experience replaced ambition with expertise. He became a senior high-altitude guide with Elite Exped. His first Everest summit came in 2011, when he was only 22. By 2026, he had climbed Everest 10 times, with his latest ascent on May 20th. He had also reached 12 of the world's 14 8,000ers. Only Cho Oyu and Shishapangma remained. His own words perhaps explain why he kept returning. After his 7th Everest summit, Gurung said that when he headed toward the mountains, his spirit rose, and standing on a summit gave him pure energy. Broad Peak was supposed to be another step toward completing all 14. Instead, it became the final chapter of a journey that had started as a porter and taken him to some of the highest places on Earth. Among the most respected members of the Broad Peak team was Kili Pemba Sherpa, a man whose name was well known within the climbing community, even if many people outside the Himalayas had never heard it. For nearly 30 years, Kili Pemba had quietly helped others achieve what they believed was impossible. Born in 1980 in Beding, a small mountain village in Nepal's Gaurishankar region, he entered the mountaineering world at just 16 years old. His first expedition was to Manaslu in 1996, not as a lead climber, but as a support worker carrying loads and learning the realities of life in the high mountains. Like many Sherpas, his career was built one season at a time. Years became decades. Expeditions became experience. Experience became trust. Eventually, Kili Pemba earned a reputation as one of Nepal's most dependable high-altitude guides and later became a lead guide with Imagine Nepal, one of the country's leading expedition companies. By 2026, his resume spoke for itself. He had stood on the summit of Mount Everest 15 times. He had climbed K2 twice. More importantly, he had earned enormous respect not only for reaching summits, but for bringing clients home safely. Only weeks before Broad Peak, on July 3, 2026, Kili Pemba reached the summit of Nanga Parbat, completing an achievement that very few climbers in history have accomplished, successfully climbing all 14 of the world's 8,000-meter peaks. For many mountaineers, that would have been the perfect ending. Instead, it became one of the final milestones in his career. But perhaps his greatest legacy was never measured by the mountains he climbed himself. It was measured by the people he helped. In 2018, Kili Pemba guided Sia Boyu, the Chinese climber who had lost both legs decades earlier, to the summit of Everest after multiple unsuccessful attempts. The climb became one of the most inspiring stories in modern mountaineering. 3 years later, in 2021, he helped another double amputee climber, Rustam Nabiev of Russia, reach the summit of Manaslu, proving once again that experience, patience, and teamwork could overcome extraordinary obstacles. That same year, Kili Pemba also worked alongside Mingma Gyalje Sherpa, better known as Mingma G, in helping clarify the true summit of Manaslu. For years, many expeditions had unknowingly stopped at a 4 summit rather than the mountain's actual highest point. Their work helped reshape how future ascents would be measured and recognized. His influence extended far beyond guiding. He quietly helped improve the standards of Himalayan mountaineering itself. Among the international team was Nadira Al-Harthi, a climber whose story had already inspired an entire region. Before she became one of the Arab world's best-known mountaineers, She had been a geography teacher in Oman. Maps fascinated her long before mountains did. Eventually, those maps became destinations. In 2019, she made history as the first Omani woman to climb Mount Everest, and only the second Omani climber ever to stand on the world's highest summit. That achievement could have defined an entire career. Instead, it became only the beginning. In 2021, she became the first Omani woman to summit Manaslu, the world's 8th highest mountain. Later that same year, she added another milestone by becoming the first woman from the Arab world to climb Ama Dablam, a peak widely respected for its technical difficulty despite being far lower than Everest. Her momentum continued. In 2022, she became the first Omani woman to summit K2, a mountain many climbers consider significantly more demanding than Everest. In 2023, she successfully climbed Switzerland's iconic Matterhorn. Then, in 2024, she added Nanga Parbat and Gasherbrum too, becoming the first Arab climber to reach both summits. Yet despite all these accomplishments, Al-Harthi repeatedly emphasized that recognition had never been her motivation. She once wrote on Omani Women's Day, "An Omani woman is limitless." It was more than a slogan. It reflected her belief that ambition should never be limited by nationality, gender, or expectations. She often explained that she never climbed for publicity. She climbed because the mountains challenged her in ways nothing else could. By July 2026, her journey was still unfolding. Broad Peak was meant to be another chapter, not the conclusion. And as the expedition continued upward, another story was unfolding. One involving an American entrepreneur who had walked away from a comfortable life in pursuit of a dream that many people spend their entire lives wondering if they should chase. Sarah Mallory. Geese was 39 years old and lived in San Antonio, Texas. Until recently, her life looked very different from the world of high-altitude expeditions. She had built a successful Pilates studio, created a career around movement and fitness, and established a life that many people would consider secure. Then, she decided to leave it behind. Earlier in 2026, Geese announced that she was closing her studio and taking what she described as a giant leap of faith into the unknown. She wrote that she wanted to see where life would take her. And then came the line that almost sounded like a prediction. There would probably be plenty of helmets, harnesses, and crampons involved. She was not simply taking a vacation, she was changing direction. Before Broad Peak, Geese had already climbed Labush East and Mera Peak in Nepal. Those experiences helped prepare her for the much greater challenge ahead. Broad Peak, at 8,047 meters, was different. It would be her first attempt at an 8,000-meter peak. That distinction matters. At lower elevations, a mountain can punish mistakes. Above 8,000 meters, the margin for error becomes dramatically smaller. Weather changes rapidly. Rescue becomes extraordinarily difficult, and the mountain itself can remain dangerous even when everything appears to be going according to plan. Geese had joined an international expedition because she wanted to discover how far she could take this new life. Instead, the expedition became her final climb. But Broad Peak was not simply a gathering of famous climbers. Behind the names that appeared in headlines were other experienced Nepali mountaineers whose careers were deeply connected to the expedition industry. Among them was Nawang Thindu Sherpa. His story represents something that is often overlooked when people discuss Himalayan climbing.
For international clients, an expedition can be one extraordinary adventure. For Nepali high-altitude professionals, the mountain is also a workplace. The job requires years of accumulated knowledge, understanding weather patterns, route conditions, equipment, timing, altitude, logistics, and the behavior of the mountain itself. And that expertise is often built far from the spotlight. Nawang Thindu had spent years working within that environment, contributing to the complex system that allows international expeditions to operate in some of the world's harshest terrain. That reality is crucial to understanding Broad Peak. When a famous climber arrives at an 8,000-meter peak, the public usually sees the summit photograph. What they rarely see is the network of experienced local professionals supporting the expedition long before that photograph is taken. And then there was another member of the team, Nima Sherpa. Like Nawang Thindu, Nima's story was tied to the professional mountaineering world rather than the celebrity spotlight. That distinction matters. The public tends to remember the expedition leader. But successful high-altitude climbing is rarely the achievement of one individual. It depends on people who prepare routes, move equipment, assess conditions, establish camps, manage logistics, and make decisions long before the climbers reach the summit ridge. This is why Broad Peak raises a difficult question. When 10 experienced people from several countries enter the same mountain environment, can experience actually guarantee survival? The answer is uncomfortable. No. Experience reduces risk. Training reduces risk. Technology reduces risk. Good weather forecasting reduces risk. But none of them eliminates the mountain. And Broad Peak had another variable that no climber could negotiate with: avalanche terrain. On July 30th, conditions deteriorated rapidly enough that the expedition was struck by an avalanche. The international team included climbers from Nepal, Pakistan, the United States, Oman, and China. Among them were people with vastly different backgrounds. Some were record holders, some were guides, some were experienced high-altitude professionals, and some were still pursuing their first major 8,000-meter breakthrough. Yet at extreme altitude, the mountain does not recognize resumes. It does not distinguish between a legendary climber and someone climbing an 8,000-meter peak for the first time. That may be the most important lesson hidden inside this tragedy. And it becomes even clearer when we look at the final members of the expedition: Nima Sherpa, Wang Zhong, and Sohail Saki, 3 climbers whose stories reveal how international modern mountaineering has become. Because Broad Peak was never just a Nepalese story, it was a global one. The final members of the Broad Peak expedition make the story even more international. Then there was Wang Zhong, representing China in an expedition that brought together climbers from several nations. His presence highlighted another reality of modern mountaineering. The world's highest peaks have become increasingly international. Nepal supplies enormous mountaineering expertise. Pakistan provides the Karakoram's extraordinary terrain. Climbers arrive from Asia, Europe, North America, and the Middle East. Different languages, different cultures, different motivations, but ultimately the same mountain. And then came Sohail Saki from Pakistan. For him, Broad Peak was not simply another destination on a map. Broad Peak is one of Pakistan's defining mountains and one of the world's 8,000-meter giants. At 8,047 meters, it rises above the boundary where the human body and the environment begin operating under radically different conditions. At that altitude, even simple decisions become complicated. Weather forecasts can change. Visibility can collapse. Snow conditions can shift. An apparently reasonable route can become dangerous within minutes. And when something goes wrong, rescue is not comparable to rescue at sea level. Helicopters have severe limitations at extreme altitude. Ground teams need time, favorable weather, and safe access. Even reaching the location of an emergency can become a major expedition in itself. That is why the Broad Peak tragedy cannot be reduced to one question such as, what mistake did they make? Sometimes there may be no single mistake. Mountains are complex systems. An avalanche can be influenced by snowpack structure, recent snowfall, wind loading, temperature changes, terrain, and slope geometry. Human decisions matter, but so do environmental forces that climbers cannot control. And that creates one of the great contradictions of modern mountaineering. The better we become at climbing, the more difficult it becomes to accept that some risks cannot be engineered away. Modern expeditions have satellite communication, advanced weather forecasting, GPS, high-quality climbing equipment, professional guides, supplemental oxygen, detailed route planning, decades of accumulated experience. Yet none of these technologies can guarantee that a slope will remain stable. Broad Peak exposed that uncomfortable truth. The 10-member international expedition brought together climbers with radically different resumes. At one end was Nirmal Purja, who had completed all 14 8,000ers in just 189 days and helped lead the historic winter ascent of K2. There was Kili Pemba Sherpa, who had completed all 14 himself only weeks earlier. There was Pur Bahadur Gurung, who had climbed Everest 10 times and 12 of the world's 14 8,000-meter peaks. There was Nadira Al-Harthi, who had built a historic record for Oman and the Arab world. And there was Sarah Mallory Geiss, who had recently left behind her established career to pursue high-altitude adventure. Then came the other professionals and climbers, Nawang Thindu Sherpa, Nima Sherpa, Wangjong, and Sohail Saki. 10 people, 5 national backgrounds, 1 mountain, 1 expedition, 1 rapidly changing environment. And suddenly, every achievement they had accumulated before Broad Peak became irrelevant to the mountain itself. That is perhaps the most difficult part for those left behind. People naturally search for explanations after a tragedy. Was the weather underestimated? Was the timing wrong? Was the route too exposed? Should the expedition have waited? Could modern technology have provided better warning? Those are legitimate questions, but they should be investigated carefully, not answered with speculation. Because without a complete technical investigation, claiming that one individual or one decision caused the disaster would be irresponsible. What we can say with certainty is that Broad Peak demonstrated the limits of human control. And perhaps that is why the final image of Nirmal Purja's journey feels so haunting, not because it proves that ambition was wrong, but because it shows how close achievement and uncertainty can exist in the same place. Before Broad Peak, Purja was chasing another record. For some members of the team, it was another summit. For others, it was a career milestone. For Geiss, it was a new life. For the Sherpas, it was part of a profession built over decades. Different reasons, same mountain. And that leaves us with the question that matters most, not only for Broad Peak, but for Everest, K2, Annapurna, and every other extreme mountain on Earth. How much risk is acceptable when the reward is a summit? Because sometimes the most important decision in mountaineering is not how to reach the top. It is knowing when the top is no longer worth the risk. The Broad Peak tragedy leaves behind no simple explanation. Nirmal Purja had climbed all 14 8,000ers in 189 days. Kili Pemba Sherpa had just completed the same extraordinary collection of peaks weeks earlier. Pur Bahadur Gurung had stood on Everest 10 times. Nadira Al-Harthi had opened doors for climbers from Oman and across the Arab world. Sarah Mallory Geiss had walked away from a successful career to pursue a dream she could no longer ignore. None of those achievements could make Broad Peak predictable, and that is the lesson worth remembering. Mountaineering is often described as a battle against the mountain, but the mountain is not an opponent. It does not care about records, nationality, money, experience, or reputation. It simply responds to weather, terrain, snow, altitude, and time. The real skill is learning to recognize those limits. There is a dangerous misconception that the greatest climber is the person who reaches the summit, no matter what. In reality, some of the greatest decisions in mountaineering happen far below the summit, when someone chooses to wait, turn around, or abandon a goal that may have taken years to reach. Broad Peak also reminds us that behind every famous expedition is a much larger community. Guides, Sherpas, families, rescue teams, meteorologists, logistics workers, and local professionals whose knowledge makes high-altitude climbing possible. Their stories deserve to be remembered alongside the records. As for Nirmal Purja, his final ambition was extraordinary. He was still pushing the boundaries of what he believed could be achieved at extreme altitude. But perhaps his legacy should not be measured only by the number of summits. It should also be measured by the questions his life leaves behind. How far should ambition go? When does determination become unnecessary risk? And perhaps most importantly, can a climber recognize that returning safely is sometimes a greater achievement than standing on the highest point? The mountains will remain. The records will eventually be broken. Another climber will one day stand where others once stood. But every expedition begins with the same responsibility: come home. If this story made you think differently about the people behind the world's highest mountains, subscribe for more real stories of Everest, K2, Broad Peak, and the extraordinary people who face them. Thank you for watching, and remember, reaching the summit is optional. Coming back alive is not. See you in the next video.